Order, order. Welcome to this morning's evidence session. This is a one-off oral session to examine the progress, or otherwise, made on improving facilities for HGV and coach drivers since our predecessor committee looked at the matter almost 4 years ago. June 2022 is when the report was published. First of all, could I ask each of our witnesses to introduce themselves, starting on my left?
So I'm Maddi, Solloway-Price. I'm the Head of Road Freight and English Regions Policy at Logistics UK. Logistics UK our members represent all of logistics in terms of all of the modes. And obviously driver facilities are a key part of the conversation for our members. So very pleased to be here today to represent their views. Thank you.
Thanks. Nikki.
Hi, I'm Nikki Rogers. I'm the Trading Director for Retail, Fuel and Commercial at Moto Hospitality. Moto is the biggest operator of motorway services in the UK, and within my remit falls all the facilities for HGV drivers.
I'm Alex Robertson. I'm the Chief Executive of Transport Focus, and we represent users of the strategic road network in England, as well as representing bus users in England outside London and users of the rail network.
Good morning, Chair. Good morning, Committee. My name is Declan. I'm the Director of Policy at the Road Haulage Association. So we're the main trade association for truck, coach and van businesses. We've got 8,500 member companies across the UK, and 81% of all freight is moved by road.
Good morning, I'm Adrian Jones. I'm Unite the Union's National Officer for Road Transport and Logistics.
Welcome. So I'll kick off. So in 2022, our predecessor committee, which I was then a member of, we published a report which found that rest facilities for HGV drivers were often lacking in number and were of poor quality. Has the situation improved or worsened since then? I'll start with Maddi.
So in terms of has it improved or worsened, first we need to kind of analyse what's been done. So we're very appreciative of the fact there is the match funding, which is through DfT and National Highways, and where that's been put in place, there have been improvements. On that, though, we would have loved to see that be even more strategic in terms of making sure that those improvements were in places where drivers needed them most, and also to open up that opportunity for new operators of facilities, because currently they're only available for existing facilities, which unfortunately doesn't have the best way of approaching and reducing the issue of capacity. In terms of other things that have been very helpful and have changed, so the National Planning Policy Framework now includes the words logistics. Unfortunately, still, that's a relatively new addition, and planning does remain the key barrier to implementing new facilities across the network. So while there have been improvements, the situation is still an issue, and we obviously want to see it.
Thank you. Nikki.
Thank you.
Yeah, so we've invested really heavily actually in HGV driver facilities since the last committee, and we've been able to access the match funding that Maddi references as well, which we're really appreciative of. Just in terms of things that we've been able to deliver on the ground, so we've grown our HGV spaces by 7%. We've added in an additional 6 coach spaces as well. We've refreshed the showers at 35 of our sites, added in 40 additional showers. We've got 20 dedicated showers for females now. And one of the things that we've been really focused on is improving the safety and security. So through the matched funding, we've been able to install 12 kilometres of fencing, 500 remotely monitored CCTV cameras. And we've also spent £3 million resurfacing our HGV facilities. To build on what Maddi says, there is still a distinct shortage of spaces. Our occupancy rates continue to grow despite the additional spaces that we've installed. And whilst there have been improvements in planning, it does remain the biggest barrier to us.
Okay, and we're going to drill down on both sides of that in our questions as well. So, Alex.
Oh yes, so we ask lorry drivers every year. We started in 2023 their experience of rest stops. And we go around different sites, so we'll do a third of one sites in the first year, next third and third. So we're at the final year of that, so we've done all the sites, and we ask them for their general perceptions of the quality and number of sites, and also their experience of the specific site that we're conducting the question at, the interview at. And more than half of the people that we interviewed said that the quality and number of sites wasn't good enough. So high levels of dissatisfaction, and that didn't change between the first and second year. We're shortly going to publish the third year, so I haven't got the numbers, but I don't think we'll see a significant change in that. And that's not terribly surprising, given that some of the improvements were happening in the last 2 or 3 years, and it will take a while to feed through into perceptions. But nonetheless, I think we will look at those numbers in a few months' time and find there's a big gap there. In terms of the experience of individual sites, you get a lot of inconsistency in that. Some of them really good experiences, some of the truck stops where we interview people, you've got satisfaction levels at 100%. It's very variable amongst motorway service areas, and perhaps that's not surprising because, of course, they've got a very different business model and are catering for different customers. Issues around parking, top 3 issues, parking availability, safety and security of the vehicle and the driver, and those 2 things are connected, and that comes out also as a safety issue in terms of people getting a decent rest. And then the consistency and quality of the services, particularly food and drink, that score's really low, but also toilets and shower facilities.
Thank you. Declan.
It certainly hasn't improved enough. There's so much more that needs to be done to properly address this issue. This is one of the top priorities of the RHA, and transport businesses that I speak to every day will tell you that this is one of the key reasons that they struggle to attract, retain and train the driving workforce that they need. I'm very glad the committee's focusing on this, because we do think it's at the nexus of reasons why we have a driver shortage and why we can't attract enough women into the sector with only 2% of drivers female, why there's rising levels of freight crime, and why we can't get enough young people behind the wheel. So this is certainly one of the root causes of many of those issues, and we think there needs to be much greater political focus on addressing it at a ministerial level. The grant schemes certainly have been very welcome, but they need to be addressing capacity where it's needed, rather than only increasing standards at existing sites. Freight crime is a significant issue in the sector, and there's a very small proportion, less than 4%, of sites which have a security accreditation, and that leads to a significant and rising level of freight crime, because criminals know that these sites are vulnerable to and are easy targets. Planning reform is something which has been mentioned, and although there's been some welcome changes, we think there much more needs to be done.
Thank you. And Adrian?
The simple answer is no. No, the situation hasn't improved. Has it worsened? I think in certain parts of the country that would certainly be the case. And I think one of the things that our members, we don't survey our members annually or biannually, we talk to our members every single day of the week. And the feedback that we get is that the focus shouldn't just be on the availability of parking spaces for overnight parking, because the vast majority of drivers in this country, HGV drivers in this country, don't regularly overnight, and they need shorter term availability of spaces. I think both previous speakers have said the focus on the issue of gender and accessibility to the sector and facilities is an extremely important one, and Unite would fully support the committee in looking into that deeper, as indeed we've taken part in the exercise that the APPG on freight has done end of last year, I think, on diversity in the sector. But we do need to look at the availability of parking, as has been said, the issue around freight crime. In your introduction, Chair, this is about facilities for drivers. I understand that freight crime, yes, our members who are affected by freight crime are impacted by that, but this is about drivers, a critical part of the country's economy, and making sure that these core professional drivers have the ability to do their job safely and professionally.
Okay, thank you very much to you all, and we'll drill down with our questions into all of those issues. I'll now go to Rebecca.
Great, thank you. I was particularly, what you said, Declan, particularly resonated, having been and visited one of your members and seen the evidence of the freight crime that's taking place. And when you've got these small operators, often with only 2 or 3 lorries to see those slash marks down the side of their lorries. It was pretty stark, actually, so thank you for reminding me. The government has begun delivering funding for improvements to parking and driver facilities, which I'm sure you're well aware of, through the HGV Parking and Driver Welfare Match Funding Grant Scheme. Indeed, some of you have already mentioned it. What impact do you believe this funding has had so far? I'll start with Alex and then go out.
So the survey that we'll publish in a few months' time will look at a new set of sites, some of which will have received some of the funding. And what I hope that will say is that where we've got good scores, that will be linked to things that have been done in the last 12 months. So I think we'll see a bit of that. We have also, so it's worth saying that we brought actually a lot of people on this table together at a round table 12 months ago, where we got everyone to look at what actions needed to take place in the next 12 months to really move things on. And we've been asking people to report back on what's been happening. National Highways are doing their own evaluation of the matched funding. And I think the latest figures we've got from them, but obviously they would be able to give you these themselves, is created 500 extra spaces. I think that the question we're going to keep coming back to is this enough? Is this the scale that we need? In 2022, I think it was, DFT did a sample of the availability of parking spaces alongside demand, and we were 4,500 short at that point. There may be a more up-to-date estimate. Since then, DFT are going to go out and do it again. So I think we will find that there are some really, we've already heard some of them, some good examples. Just is it enough? So that money, I'm sure, will have been well spent, could perhaps have been more targeted, as some people have already said. But when that ends, and one of the DFT-led part, I think, is ending, we've really got to stand back and think what's the next phase and how we're going to target it and get enough out of it.
Nikki, you've already given some good examples, but do you think, a bit like Alex has said, there needs to be more funding put forward for the next phase, whatever that may look like?
Yes, absolutely. So we've been able to access the funding to grow our spaces, but as you've just mentioned, crucially on security. And we have seen a significant improvement in security. So we've got 12 kilometres of fencing at 47 of our sites. We've got 500 remotely controlled CCTV or remotely monitored CCTV cameras, which are linked directly to the police force and a control centre. They are monitoring all of our sites. We've seen a 35% reduction in freight crime. We've got dedicated security at certain sites where we know we have potential for issues. And the stat that we're most proud of is actually 2 out of 3 of our sites have had 1 or less security incident in the last 12 months. So we have seen a significant reduction. We believe that the additional funding will allow us just to further bolster the security of everybody who stays at our sites. Part of the challenge that we have, though, is that that security is focused within the HGV compounds because of the challenges that we have with occupancy. There are vehicles that simply can't find a space within the HGV compound and they will park in the main car park or on the slip roads or on the entrance roads. Those areas are obviously not covered by fencing and CCTV.
Maddi, how about you?
So where there have been improvements to things like parking capacity, CCTV, fencing, lighting, our members are obviously really pleased to see those. But as mentioned, 500 extra places are just not enough. More is needed, and also we'd like to make sure that's targeted where the need is greatest along the strategic road network. What you often find is that drivers will go out of their way to park where there are good facilities. Obviously that reduces efficiencies, so we do need to make sure that any new facilities, any expansion to facilities are along the strategic road network. Also some forward planning to improve confidence, knowing where that funding is going to go, how long it's going to be available for, would be very helpful for people to be able to forward plan as to what investments could look like in the future.
Great, thank you. Declan.
Yes, so the grant scheme is very welcome and has made an impact in upgrading the very basic facilities like showers, toilets, and welfare and rest areas. We don't believe it's had an impact on capacity because it has focused on upgrading existing sites. Whilst some additional lorry spaces have been added as part of the scheme, I believe it's less than 2,000 overall, and our estimate is that there's a shortage of 11,000 lorry parking spaces nationally, so it's a very significant capacity problem. And there needs to be more focus on freight corridors and route strategies. So whether you look at, for example, the M1 or the M6 in the Midlands or the M20 in the southeast, there's countless major arterial routes that do not have sufficient lorry parking capacity, and the scheme hasn't changed that. It has not addressed that capacity problem. And there needs to be a much more active coordinating role by government on looking at how we can bring about capacity at these key routes. Whilst we want the grant scheme to continue because the investment is much needed and it unlocks private investment, the key is looking at where drivers actually need stops.
And we're coming on to capacity.
Yes.
Shortly, we've got some questions on that. Adrian?
The scheme itself, yes, of course, it's, as Nikki has referred to, it's delivered tangible improvements in certain areas. But from a driver's perspective, and I know there's going to be an assessment of the impact of the scheme done later in the year, but from a driver's perspective, we're just not seeing that improvement. Yes, there may be hundreds of kilometres of more fencing, but criminals will just look elsewhere. And with the lack of secure parking areas, criminals will just look at where trucks are being parked outside of those areas. So we do need to have a holistic approach. One of the issues that we've identified with the scheme was obviously the match funding thing, which in theory we agree with, but and just looking at the figures, Moto has been by far the biggest user of that scheme, and therefore the biggest investor in that scheme. But has that match funding actually prevented some smaller operators, some smaller companies being able to invest because they haven't been able to match fund what they need to do to improve their facilities? But again, I will flag that this is not just around formal parking areas, motorway service areas and the strategic road network. This is about a national infrastructure issue that we need to look at ensuring that our drivers are kept safe.
Okay. Can I just come back to that point about the match funding element of MFGS? Are there types of stops or types of parts of the network where the opposite end of the scale from Moto, where the owners of the stops just don't have the capacity to match the funding, and who pays? And is a match funding scheme appropriate for some parts of the network or some types of stops? I don't know who wants to pick that up.
I think the issue with truck stops as a whole is that the majority of truck stops are independent businesses, and if you look at motorway service areas, are obviously dominated by larger companies. Truck stops. I think the scheme as a whole, the grant scheme, they haven't always. A lot of independent truck stops haven't engaged in the scheme because of the size of their business and the nature of their business, and certainly the scheme has relied on proactive applications from those businesses, and in some cases the funding hasn't gone to the areas where it's most needed. So, for example, the particularly high crime areas, we haven't seen the funding impact those particular problems.
Is that because the owners of the truck stops just can't afford the match funding? Their side of
certainly that's a potential barrier for them to be involved in it.
Thank you. Okay, Elsie.
Thanks, Chair, and thanks everyone for giving evidence this morning. So the HGV sector and its workforce are really crucial to the local economy in my constituency of Harewood and Middleton North, which is in Greater Manchester. And sort of, as you'll probably know, the previous Transport Committee sort of heard comments from drivers, things like, I would rather stay dirty than use the showers at one site, and another sharing that they paid £37 a night to sleep in their cab and have their tyres slashed. And I think it's really clear from your comments already, actually, that sort of facilities-related issues facing those that make up the sector have been really substantial. You've obviously all touched on this already, but what would you identify as the biggest problems currently affecting parking or rest facilities for drivers, and how can they be overcome? And I think we'll start with Adrian. It would be interesting to hear the experiences of your members.
It is capacity, it is availability, and remembering that drivers have to take statutory breaks. So whilst, of course, drivers will take breaks as and when they need to, there is a legal obligation to take statutory breaks. So facilities have to be provided. So the state, in effect, says you must take a break. but the state is not providing the facilities for drivers to be able to take those breaks. And we need to have a serious look, and I keep saying a holistic look, across the entire country and the entire sector. But when we look at the match funding scheme, there are 100 successful applications. By far, the majority of those are 1 or 2 applications, so the much smaller elements. We look at the geographical spread of that, and just looking down the list, I can't find a single one in Greater Manchester, for example.
Yeah.
That may be because the facilities are already there, of course, but probably not. What we need to look at an end-to-end solution to this. One of the issues, and I'm sure Chair will come on to the whole planning and the restrictions and obstacles in the planning process, but one of the issues that we've seen over a long time is new logistics developments are being built without lorry drivers' facilities being included in that. And I've challenged individual developments over the years to be told, well, we don't need to have parking facilities for lorries because we have a window where a driver will come in, load or unload and then leave. Well, that's fine. That's saying it's outside of our gate, so it's not our problem. It is your problem. And that's why Unite is very clear that there is a responsibility on the hauliers, our employers, but also on the users of road transport. And that means the companies outside of the logistics sector who have drivers coming in every day, but it's not on their radar at all. It's not something that is considered. And we should look, and I think what you will hear is, there's 5 people on the panel and we all broadly agree on what the problem is. And I think we can all broadly agree on how we solve this. And one of the ways we need to do that is actually engage with people outside of this sector, engage with the CBI, engage with small businesses to say, look, this is an issue. How can we make sure that your business, when a driver turns up, they can access toilets, they can access a canteen, they can access a vending machine, that it's not something that is just off limits because you're not our employee. And if we can start at that very low level, we can then build up of dealing with the issue on a day-to-day basis to then looking at the bigger schemes, which are the motorway service areas, the larger areas of investment.
Thanks, Adrian. And as you say, I think there will be broad agreement across the panel in terms of what the problems are and some of the ways they can be overcome. So I might not go down and ask everybody, but I will ask maybe a couple more. Maddi, I'd be interested to know if the experiences of your members are similar to, and the drivers that you speak to are similar to what Adrian's just identified.
Yes, so really it's all down to getting the basics right. If you or I were going to work and not having access to toilets, showers, food, it would be a bad day, but unfortunately that's the reality of the men and women who literally keep our country moving. And so really it is about getting those basics correct and should be the bare minimum. Rest in a lay-by, it just isn't always going to provide adequate rest, which is ultimately also a safety concern. And welfare of drivers, at least in our view, should be viewed in exactly the same capacity as safety of a vehicle. Ultimately, their welfare has safety implications as well as productivity implications, but they should be viewed in the same way. So it's not a big leap to say that drivers suffer when there are not facilities available for them.
Okay. Does anyone else have comments on that question? Declan? Oh, sorry. No.
I was just going to build on what Adrian said. So just in relation to, we're very focused on that longer term stay, but we actually have 10 million HGV visits to our sites every year. Only 900,000 of those stay for longer than 2 hours. So when we are talking about capacity and the challenge that the lack of space brings, it's not just about the challenges for those who are parking overnight. We definitely would agree that actually space is a big challenge. We've been able to add 187 spaces since the last hearing, and actually our occupancy rates have grown further. So space and planning is the biggest challenge for us.
And for drivers?
Drivers need a safe, clean, secure environment where they can properly rest, and frequently they just do not have access to that at all. Okay. If you or I were working, we wouldn't accept having no access to a toilet, but we're expecting drivers to do that day in, day out. So it's very basic facilities, and it's dignity for people that are doing very important jobs.
Maddi, so presumably you also represent the owners of big logistics sites and so on. I seem to remember hearing that drivers were not made to feel very welcome if they even wanted to ask to use the toilet when they were stopping, let alone get into the works canteen to grab something to eat. Is that an issue in your sector?
Unfortunately, it can be. Yeah. It's something that we often talk to our members about, because unfortunately, when you still hear feedback from drivers that the biggest difference that could be made in their day is someone bothered to learn their name, there's an issue, isn't there? Yeah. So when people are just called drive as opposed to their actual name, that doesn't really show the respect that drivers deserve. They literally, as I've said, nothing moves without logistics, and certainly nothing moves without drivers. And so when they don't feel respected, that obviously has a significant impact on their mental health. But when there isn't the sharing of facilities, which is something that actually, working with Transport Focus, that was a point that was identified that we could work on, is trying to make sure that our members open up facilities where available to other members. And although it's not wide,
you have to be a member,
exactly,
which, and that's
and so it doesn't really solve the issue, but it does help in a small way.
But there is an awareness in the sector of that human need.
Yes, there is, and I do think there is an improvement. There's a bit of a cultural shift happening at the moment, with traffic commissioners talking more about human factor, driver welfare, and within Logistics UK we've just created something called Thrive, which is to signpost for our members, but also further afield where they can get access to support for mental health, because ultimately all of these things, lack of drive facilities, does impact mental health day to day, and we're very aware of that, and respect is a big part of that. Access to facilities is another.
Thank you. Lawrence, you wanted to come in.
Thank you, Chair. It's on that same point. Good morning. I should also draw the committee's attention to the fact I'm a member of Unite and GMB. On that point, Mr Jones, I saw you said previously that there should be an obligation on the large logistics operators to share those facilities. Would you mind talking us through how that would work in practice?
You're absolutely right, and it's not just the large logistics operators, it's anybody that uses road transport. But the large logistics operators, as an example, and as Maddi said, broadly, we can go to a large retail distribution centre, speak to the company and say, oh yes, we give our drivers access to the canteen and they can have proper rest and the toilets. And this is not an apocryphal story, it's a genuine example. One of the largest retailers in the country, when I then asked to speak to see the facilities for goods in drivers rather than their own delivery drivers, it was a poky little room with hard plastic chairs with a vending machine. Completely different. Now, when we challenged that employer, it was, it's a bit of a no-brainer. We can deal with that, we can put that right. But it's making sure that that conversation is taking place. We can't do that distribution centre by distribution centre, factory by factory, shop by shop. There has to be some overall control of that. As Maddi said, the sharing of available spaces. There's an organisation called SNAP that has an online booking system and different facilities, and they've created a scheme where if there is even a small haulier has a couple of spaces where their trucks are out, they can then in effect Airbnb that space for a truck to come and use in that kind of facility. And that's the sort of progressive, inventive way of, well, we've got spaces there sitting there, can we actually use that? But when you drive around the country, and I spend a lot of time in industrial areas, just a mile from a very good truck stop, you will see trucks parked up in a lay-by. And we have to ask the reason why. And sometimes that will be the cost. Sometimes it will be because I'm just on a short break and I can spend 10 minutes driving around an MSA trying to find a space where I can just pull off and stop in a lay-by for 15 minutes, half an hour, 45 minutes. So there is a very broad spectrum of issues within this with very, very different solutions to each one.
Okay, thank you. Now, a slightly Sideways topic, but very important too. Alex.
Thank you, Chair. Coach drivers are also driving reasonably large vehicles, often over fairly long distances. What are some of the issues experienced specifically by coach drivers, and to what extent are they similar and different to the experiences of HGV drivers? Shall we start with Nikki?
Yeah, so we value the coach drivers. We see them as a valuable customer group for us. We have, as I mentioned in the opening, 636 available coach spaces at our sites. We treat them in the same way with regards to HGV drivers. Coach drivers are also entitled to a meal voucher, as HGV drivers are. There are some challenges that we see that just because of the nature of when they're coming onto our sites, because they're full of customers and passengers, we have to make sure that those spaces are quite close to the main amenity building, so that there's clear walkways, clear passageways for customers. They do tend to arrive predominantly during our sort of peak trade times, so they are at our sites at different times of the day. But we treat them in the same way, in the same professional regard as HGV drivers, and we will always go out of our way to make sure that the coach spaces are available when they arrive. However, as I mentioned, we do recognise that there are instances where sometimes those coach bays are busy.
And we've also heard from the Confederation of Passenger Transport, and I quote, that sometimes HGV drivers are monopolising the coach spaces. Does that ring true to you?
I wouldn't say that they were monopolising the coach spaces. I think what we've already discussed, what's happened is because of a distinct lack of spaces, the HGV drivers, if they're on their taco break or they need a break, they have to stop somewhere. By the very nature that HGVs are similar sizes to coach bays, if there are no HGV spaces available, then they do occasionally use the coach bays. We do have security on a number of our sites where it's a problem, and we will make sure that the HGVs aren't blocking those spaces unnecessarily, and we'll always support coach drivers and their passengers if they do have to park in an undesignated area.
Alex?
Yeah, I mean, we surveyed coach drivers as well as logistics drivers in our surveys. It's worth saying that they're a much smaller part of the sample. I think they're 5%. I think that reflects broadly the kind of where it is in the industry. And very similar issues to what you've heard. I mean, the solutions might be different, and the stopping patterns, I suspect, will be different too. And there probably is an issue, this is more on the solutions rather than the experience, about how the availability of scarce parking spaces is perhaps shifted over the course of the day. We've seen some examples of where that's worked, when spaces can be, the use of a space can be changed depending on the time of day. But no, they're broadly reporting the same thing. Availability, quality, all those things are coming through from coach drivers as well.
I'm very glad you've asked about coaches, because I do think coaches are a unique and very much underappreciated mode of transport that frequently get lumped together with buses. So I'm glad the committee is looking at coach parking. And one of the concerns, to add to the points, is that there have been a number of tourist sites and towns that have restricted coach parking, and whether that's in the Cotswolds or some National Trust sites. And the issue with that is that it discourages people to use coaches who are very often disabled or elderly. And coaches are one of the greenest form of motorised transport, so we need to be encouraging coach travel rather than discouraging it. And I think too often we don't view coaches as part of the tourist supply chain and the visitor experience. I mean, if you look at how the government approaches tourism, coaches do not get featured in the conversation or in the overall strategy. So we need to be viewing the coaches as a key part of that, and that includes how visitors are experiencing coach parking when they visit sites.
Adrian, they're not a very unionised sector, but
no, it's we do have agreements with coach companies, and there is a variance in the sector. So when you've got just up the road Victoria coach station, for example, where there is appropriate facilities for coach drivers, but just building on what Declan says, what we've had highlighted to us is, as a coach driver, you are taking a group of passengers to a stately home or a visitor attraction. You drop them off, but there's nowhere for them to park, and you have to go and find somewhere to park. Just as you see down on the embankment, coaches parked up, dropping off people, and then where do they go afterwards? Invariably, that is some industrial estate, a side street somewhere, and there isn't appropriate facilities there for those drivers. So there are similarities with the HGV world, but again, it comes to capacity and the standards that drivers can access.
Thank you. Maddi?
I'm afraid that Logistics UK doesn't really cover the code, so I have to defer to others on the panel.
Right, Elsie we're going to drill down into an area that a couple of witnesses have already touched on, but in a bit more detail now. Elsie.
Yeah, thanks, Ruth. So real concerns have been raised by female drivers, including, I might just mention, one of my constituents, Kaz, who works in this sector, and as Adrian sort of suggested before, in Greater Manchester, there aren't many appropriate facilities for drivers, and Kaz has raised this with me repeatedly, especially not for female drivers. They raise issues related to their safety and security at stopping locations, specifically facilities, as you'll know, with poor lighting, a lack of suitable or any, in fact, women's toilets and showers, and many women having to sleep in wholly unsuitable places. And I'm sure these concerns actually are central to why women only make up 2% of the sector, and why they're leaving it and why they might be deterred from ever joining it actually in the first place. What is the panel's view of the specific problems that female drivers face when trying to access facilities, and how can we begin to address them? Adrian, may I start with you again?
Of course, and you've highlighted very eloquently the main issues, and women drivers have exactly the same issues as men drivers and others, but as you say, poor lighting, lack of security. We have a women workers committee within our own sector, within transport and logistics, and some of the issues that our members raise are, could there be dedicated spaces for women drivers closer to, if it's an MSA, could that be closer to the facilities rather than walking all the way across an HGV park? But you're absolutely right. Even where facilities are available, are they suitable for lone working women? And we have had many discussions with employers that, yes, provide facilities, but when we say, OK, they are just general drivers' facilities, why aren't there separate facilities for women? Well, there's no women drivers. And it's chicken and egg scenario, isn't it? Let's be perfectly honest. And even where there are separate cubicles in toilets. Now, as a bloke, that wouldn't bother me, being in a cubicle next to another bloke. But how would a woman feel about that? So there has to be some consideration in a male-dominated sector of hearing the voices of women drivers and saying, OK, we need to make some fundamental changes. And I think that's the key to this, is engaging with women drivers, finding out what the problems are, but then putting a plan together to solve those problems.
Thank you. Nikki, do you think that there should be dedicated facilities for women drivers?
Yes, and we do.
Okay.
So we have 20% of our showers are female only, so they are female specific. They are located in the female toilets or within the female block, so there will be no males that could access those. All of our toilets are male and female. We do have a handful that are unisex, but in every site we have dedicated male and female facilities. We also have a further sort of 20% of our showers which we do designate as unisex, but they're not sort of conjoined cubicles where you're sharing a facility with somebody of the opposite sex. They are dedicated showers in a completely separate area. So yes, we absolutely believe that there should be separate facilities. Every site that we are building now from scratch also has dedicated female facilities. So yes.
Maddi, would you say there's particular problems that the industry faces when providing these facilities? Why aren't there more of them? I know that there are relatively few women drivers, as mentioned, but are there any other reasons why industry doesn't?
There should be. Very simply, there should be provision for women. Women aren't asking for special treatment. Obviously, the betterment of driver facilities is good for all drivers, and obviously the infrastructure that's existed historically has been geared more towards male drivers just because of the nature of the industry, but there should be no reason why there aren't facilities provided for female drivers, and as far as I can tell there should be no barriers to doing so, and certainly the better facilities that you get and the provision for female drivers, we'll see more brilliant women entering our industry.
But there's clearly an issue there, and it would be good to understand how you think that industry or even government can begin to address this. Does anyone have any comments on that? What's needed here? Do you want to?
So the fact is that there's not only enough female facilities, but frequently when we speak to female drivers, they just can't access the facilities that they need when they need them. I've heard stories of female drivers going to truck stops or motorway service areas and they just can't. There's a key for the female toilet and there's no one available to give it to them, for example. So a lot of female drivers don't feel like it's a welcoming environment. We know there's high levels of discrimination against female drivers. There's research by Trucking Lives, a project that looked into driver sentiments that talks about that. So there needs to be a lot more done just to provide those facilities and then create the welcoming space.
Okay. Alex, do you have any comments on that one?
Yeah, I mean, I agree with everything the panel said, and that will be borne out by our survey, but obviously we're surveying a very, very small number of women, and I think the challenge here, as with a lot of what we're talking about, is how you get ahead of the problem. What would facilities that would make a significant impact on making the industry more attractive to women, what would that look like, and how do you get ahead of it rather than just reacting to the situation that we're in at the moment?
I mean, it's part of that. It's quite a male culture, and is some of the issue around misogyny within the driving culture, or is that more to do with how women are perceived as being treated in other parts of their job when they're interacting with customers or clients or whatever? Or do we not know?
Well, I think the reality is that many women don't feel like driving is a job for them because they don't feel it's a welcoming environment that they can operate in.
They don't feel. Is that upheld by any kind of studies?
Well, as I say, we know there's high levels of discrimination against women, and that does impact how comfortable they feel doing the job.
Just from speaking to our members, they're very welcoming of women coming into the profession across all different jobs within logistics, but also as drivers. I really do think that one of the key issues and key barriers is the historical infrastructure that exists. That if there aren't facilities for women to use, even if they join the industry, it becomes then an issue of retention, because even if everyone is making them feel welcome, which we hope they do, if there aren't facilities for them, I think that sends quite a clear message.
Thank you. Scott?
Just coming back to Road Haulage Association, I mean, it's interesting what you say about, we're talking about misogyny in the sector. Is this something, as a membership, membership organisation, do you set standards for your members in terms of how they approach this problem? Because it's not unusual, is it, to see an HGV that might be depicting women on the outside of it, or sometimes you can see on the inside of it in a way that's not always positive. Is this something you expect? Do you expect any standard of behaviour from your members? Sorry to put you on the spot.
Well, we've certainly been a very vocal organisation about ensuring that the industry is a welcoming space for females. We are part of the APPG on freight and logistics, chaired by Rachel Taylor, and we put out a report recently on improving diversity in the sector and the practical ways that can happen, both.
Did that include some of those externally facing things? You're aware what I'm talking about?
Yeah, well, I think it includes both.
But they're probably very small operators are doing that. I don't think the bigger operators would be...
I think it includes both. The solutions lie in some of the actions that we've been talking about on facilities, but also just ensuring that there is a more welcoming environment, because whether it's customers or anyone else, many women drivers just don't feel it's a welcoming place that they can be part of.
Okay, sorry to put you on the spot.
Thank you. Okay, Jacob.
Yes, thank you. Just trying to understand the health and well-being impact. Obviously, very concerning that suicide rates amongst HGV drivers are 20% higher than the general population, and also drivers are more likely to be affected by type 2 diabetes. So we'd just be really interested to know what is that direct impact from the lack of rest facilities that it's actually having on drivers' health and well-being. So, Adrian, do you want to start?
Thank you for raising this point. It's an extremely important point for us and our members. There is some really good work being done in this area, particularly through Loughborough University and the Structured Health Intervention for Truckers scheme, which Unite is a big supporter of. Is looking at not just understanding what the issues are, but offering solutions for drivers. And some of those solutions are to have more exercise, which is great. But when you're on a motorway service area, where do you exercise? Even one example last year, a driver who, in his own depot where he was employed, used to walk the perimeter of the depot. It's half a mile, so we do it a couple of times. That's a mile walking. Excellent. To be told, no, you can't do that. There's not a dedicated walkway. So he was prevented from doing that, rather than, okay, let's look at having a dedicated walkway and encourage more people to do that. You're absolutely right. It's lone working. Many drivers are out under a hell of a lot of pressure, under constant monitoring and surveillance, with tight delivery and collection deadlines, with sometimes not sympathetic other road users as well. And being able to escape that environment, to have a break that is away from the workplace is vitally important. And that's one of the other things that we need to look at. What are the minimum standards for different types of parking areas, from very well equipped MSAs and large truck stops to lay-bys and informal parking areas? Where do we create that standard, and how do we enforce that standard? So there are direct links with the nature of the work and the lack of parking facilities, and particularly for overnight drivers as well that are overnighting in informal parking areas. The quality of rest is not what it needs to be to ensure safety on our roads.
Maddi, did you want to come in?
Yeah, so the statistic that you shared is one of the first things that actually I found when joining Logistics UK, and I found it completely shocking. And Randstad's 2023 Health and Wellbeing in Workplace reported that 27% of logistics workers that they surveyed have taken time off due to unmanageable stress and mental health issues, which, joined with the statistics you shared, just really illustrates the impact that mental health and wellbeing has on this industry. I've mentioned it previously, but health and well-being should certainly be seen as a safety implication as much as anything. These people are running very large vehicles and need to be safe doing so. When sleep is impacted, when there aren't places to get healthy food, when you have to park in a lay-by, those things are ultimately going to impact your mental health, well-being, and everything in between, which is why we've set up Thrive, which I mentioned earlier, as a platform to signpost drivers and others to support.
Alex?
I mean, I very much agree with the points that have been made already, but just to illustrate them from our survey and the link between vehicle security, personal security and sleep. So if you are if you think the vehicle security is poor, you're very, very likely to think your own personal security is poor. 4 in 10 people would then go on to say they had a good night's sleep. That's far too low in a safety-critical environment. That's the one point. I think the other thing, we are talking a lot about effectively getting the basics right, but actually we're going to attract people into it, particularly younger HGV drivers. What's the average age now? 52 of an HGV. We want to attract people like that, and it's not just. It is absolutely about getting the basics. It's got to be about more than that as well. Thinking about the facilities in terms of exercise, that's what you'd expect, wouldn't you? Overnight, it's effectively your home environment for that night. There are some initiatives where I think Newark is looking at how you can connect with the local community, but there's so much more that needs to be done, not just to get the basics right, but to create an environment where people think, actually, I wouldn't mind doing that, being there overnight.
That is scary when you've got a very large, very heavy metal box driving down busy roads with people who are more likely than most of us to drop off to sleep or have a critical health incident. Yeah,
I mean, and Adrian's, sorry to come back in, but Adrian made the point. I am talking about a survey in actual sites, right? And you, so that this is the kind of good end of it. So there'll be experiences which are far worse than I've described.
Okay, Lawrence. Oh, sorry. Carry on, Jake.
And we've touched on some of the issues around sleep deprivation and lack of exercise. What would you say are the main health and well-being issues that come across from drivers that you speak to? Declan?
Certainly, I mean, drivers, there's a range of health risks associated with HGV drivers, they're 1.5 more times likely to be obese, and as you say, there's a much higher rate of diabetes. So providing spaces at these facilities where they can, get out of their cab and socialise and exercise is critically important. I also don't think we treat driver health seriously enough when it comes to road safety, because certainly, as you say, having a good quality sleep is essential for reducing accidents and reducing fatigue, and we aren't thinking about driver health in that way.
And is there any particular good best practice across the sector where changes are being made that are positive? Nikki, you've obviously mentioned some of the work that you're doing, but are there any other parts of the sector that are doing particularly good work to support health and well-being?
You probably won't surprise you that I'm going to reference something that we're doing as well here. We absolutely recognise that the health and well-being, but also the mental health of our drivers is absolutely critical. And we partner with Mind, and we launched something called Cabversation, because it's quite isolating being out on the road for that period of time. So we encourage drivers to sit down at a designated bench where they can talk to other HGV drivers, other customers, just to create that sort of social bond. And we've had some really positive feedback from that. We are also reviewing, additional facilities that we might be able to install at some of our sites that do have space, such as driver lounges and gyms and all of those things. So we do absolutely recognise that. Interesting that you say, 4 out of 10 drivers, don't feel safe, because I think what that's sort of highlighted is, as I mentioned, 2/3 of our sites have had one or less security incident over the last 12 months, which we're really, really proud of. We need to make sure that we are communicating that level to all of our drivers that park there, because sometimes it can be about the perception rather than the actual incidents that happen. We do have TAPA security accreditation, so at 47 of our locations. So we are really confident that our sites are safe. We just need to make sure that we communicate that in the most effective way.
And how many of your sites have got gyms or places where drivers can exercise?
I'd need to go away and find out the exact number, which I'll get back to you on.
Lawrence, yeah.
Thank you. And just before we move on to the next question, National Highways work to prevent suicide and to reduce suicide numbers amongst all drivers, I think has a relevance here. And if any witnesses wanted to submit evidence in writing about National Highways' role in reducing suicide rates, I think we'd be interested in the committee to receive that. But returning to workforce recruitment and retention pressures, I think we're all conscious that the extreme pressures during the pandemic were symptomatic of underlying problems in the sector. You've all given us evidence on recruitment and retention strains, and I think Logistics UK have said that the number of HGV drivers is actually falling. Now, I appreciate that the reasons are multifaceted, but we'd be interested in hearing about what contribution you think that poor facilities plays in people leaving the sector and new people not being recruited to the sector. So perhaps starting with Ms. Solloway-Price and then working in a way down the panel. Thank you.
So, as you say, retention and also attraction to the industry is either stagnating or falling. And we have an ageing workforce within logistics. That's an issue that we're all well aware of. In terms of attracting people to our industry as a whole, what we're very keen to see, and working with organisations like Generation Logistics, which you may have heard of, raise the profile of why this is a brilliant industry to be part of. And one thing that we're always calling for are case studies from industry to show why this is a brilliant industry to be part of. Whilst also saying that, though, we can all have an adult, nuanced conversation that there are things that need to improve. And one of those very key things is the provision of driver facilities. It does not go without saying that ultimately, if you go to work and you do not have access to the basics, it might not be, you might not have longevity within that industry. So I think we cannot underestimate how important driver facilities are to the retention and also attraction of people working in our industry.
I just sort of echo everything that's already been said. So we're committed to improving the facilities for all of the HGV drivers that do arrive at our sites. But we are very aware that even at our sites with spaces, they are running at higher occupancy rates than we would like to see. I totally understand that an industry where you can't get parked safely overnight is not going to be attractive to many drivers. So we would be committed to increasing space, adding in more capacity, and then improving the facilities, and that is what we're doing.
Yeah, I think I agree again with what's been said. Getting the facilities right is a necessary but not sufficient condition of attracting people into the workforce, and it needs to be more than the bare minimum. The Trucking Lives survey that was mentioned earlier, I think at the time that was done, half of current HGV drivers had considered quitting in the 12 months prior to the survey. We need to be getting new drivers in. So yeah, I think this, you have to, if you're going to try and attract people in, when they actually get there and experience it or hear the experience of existing drivers, it's got to match the ambition that's been told to you in terms of coming in. So I think it needs to be sorted out. If I can, I might just clarify something that I was saying earlier about the relationship between sleep and vehicle security. It's 9 out of 10 drivers who rated vehicle security as good also felt able to rest or sleep. By contrast, fewer than 4 in 10 felt they could rest when they perceived vehicle security as poor. So it's that link between vehicle security and poor sleep. Obviously, where vehicle security is higher than people, the number is higher than 4 in 10.
Thank you. And Mr. Robertson, just before we move on, do the surveys and other evidence that exists allow us to rank driver facilities relative to other factors to a satisfactory degree?
So the surveys that we do allow you to look at the facilities against one another over a 3-year period, so it's a third of the facilities each time, and you can rank them, and there was a very big disparity, particularly among the MSA provision, and truck stops tend to be a lot better. It doesn't then rate it, I suppose, if this is what you're getting at, is how much does the experience of facilities affect their overall sort of enjoyment of their work or whatever. I don't think we've got a direct, I could check, I don't think we've got something quite as direct as that, although we have sat down and talked to people in qualitative work where people will talk about it as a factor that is affecting will be a factor potentially in leaving the industry. So
thank you.
So I don't want to repeat what's been said, but I do want to just give a few things in relation to the driver shortage, because I think this explains why this issue is so important. We've heard about the structural challenges that exist amongst the driver population, so the ageing workforce, the lack of female drivers, and the sort of narrow demographics. And I think those structural challenges haven't improved in recent years, and it have been the case for a long time, which make the sector very vulnerable when there is, if there's an increase in freight volumes or there are fluctuations in growth. And we've done some work which shows that there's a need for 40,000 new drivers to come into the sector each year over the next 5 years just to keep supply chains moving. And we've already got an issue with retention, which isn't being helped by the standard of facilities and the lack of facilities. So this is the root of the reason why we need to address this.
Thank you.
I think you've highlighted yourself there's a number of issues that play into the very long-term driver shortage. The driver shortage was not in 2021-22. The driver shortage is not now. The driver shortage has been ongoing for 30 plus years. And that's driven mostly by low rates of pay, long hours, poor facilities. All of these things are contributory to that. And including the fact that it is one of the most monitored jobs. I represent drivers and logistics workers, and I can't think of another profession anywhere that is monitored and surveilled the same as a professional driver is. And when you put that with low rates of pay, long hours, nights out, poor places to park, lack of security, poor health, it's not a good advert for a job, is it? And so we do need to deal with each element, but again, I will say there is a holistic view that we need to take about an industry. But we have to look at how we can improve facilities to reduce that impact, to take that contributory factor away. And again, there is broad agreement on what we need to do and how we need to do that. But we do need to see action. We need to see a government-driven action plan to make real change. This is the third Transport Select Committee I've given evidence to, and to a certain extent I'm saying the same things that I have done in the two previous sessions. Yes, we are seeing the improvements that have already been highlighted, but there is so much more to do.
Thank you. And one follow-up on something you said about surveillance, and it certainly accords with my experience as a union officer that invasive and at times unscientific monitoring was a real problem in the sector. To your knowledge, are any of the operators collecting information data through surveillance during rest periods, and would it be the case that some operators might be holding information that would be relevant to our inquiry, such as amount of time drivers are spending in laybys?
That information would be recorded through GPS tracking, through tachograph data. I deal with, as you will know, I deal with the better end of the sector, with the employers that work with Unite, and we ensure that the intrusive data collection is kept to a minimum. Can I say that doesn't happen elsewhere? No, I can't.
Thank you. I mean, just on the subject of laybys, because 4 years ago when we did the inquiry, we went to a lay-by on an A road on the SRN in Kent, which had to be used because so many of the Kent MSAs are often full. I think we were told if you don't get in by 5 p.m, you can't get into the MSAs when running to or from the Channel. Is that still the problem? And I have to say, what we saw was disgusting and obviously dangerous for drivers and loads. Is the situation still as bad on laybys? What's the relationship with local authorities? Because they're in a difficult position. Should they close them? Should they encourage them? And therefore fund the maintenance of them?
I'm quite happy to come back. It's exactly the same situation, particularly around, like you say, down in Kent with the freight coming in, going out of the country through Dover. But it's not just limited to that. If you go into Liverpool and outside the port of Liverpool, is exactly the same. Drivers parked up with absolutely no access to any facilities whatsoever. And it's not just around ports, it's up and down the country, everywhere. That is exactly the same situation. But laybys play a very, very important part for professional drivers, because that's where, again, a statutory tachograph break, that's where a driver will look to pull in and take 15 minutes, 30 minutes, 45 minutes break, just to have that rest, that statutory rest. So they do play a vital part, but they're not the solution for longer term and certainly overnight parking. We understand there is a safety element with slow-moving vehicles pulling into fast-moving traffic. The A34 in Oxfordshire is a prime example of this. But where we are seeing technology being used, and don't get me started on smart motorways, but where you've got slow-moving vehicles with signage being used to tell other road users that slow-moving vehicles are entering the carriageway, can't we look at a different solution rather than closing laybys and just forcing drivers elsewhere? And if I can also bring a comparison with what we see in mainland Europe, is much far more and much better roadside facilities, not MSAs, so not big retail outlets, but areas where lorries and drivers can park relatively safely with basic facilities that are much more widely accessible than we do in this country. So we can learn from international examples as well.
And I think in France there's a low-key service area every 10 kilometres, I think, with basic facilities, including exercise, outdoor gym facilities. Okay, thank you. We now move on to Scott, a bit more on the variations between different locations.
Yes, I think we've covered this to a certain extent, so I just wanted to make sure nobody had anything to add about, the variation between the different types of stopping locations. Don't get too excited. You've got nothing to add, that's fine. You've got something, Alex. Thank you. You're helping.
A wee bit for you. So I mean, we've said before, truck stops. I think of the top 16 areas that we surveyed in our most recent report, all but one of them was a truck stop. So dedicated facilities, maybe that's not too surprising. You get a lot of variation in the MSAs, particularly, and then you get a bit of variation on the A road. So I mean, what does that tell you? It tells you there's inconsistency. Yeah. It also tells you can get it right, and that I think is what it's saying. But so there's a kind of very mixed picture, and it's how we get onto solutions, I think.
So do we know what best practice is then, and is there a forum to share that?
Yes, I think so. I mean, I think we had a round table, was it 12 months ago? We brought people together. That was sharing good practice, actually talking about a lot of the solutions that we are talking about now. And to
who took the actions away from that then?
So we had some actions for the Department for Transport, some actions for National Highways, some actions for logistic operators and for others. And we're coming back together, I think, in September or October. And actually, I wanted to say at some point, it would be good to have members of the Select Committee there if you'd like to come along and be part of that conversation too, because I think it does need some political support as well as hearing what some of the challenges are. So there's plenty of other forums outside that where the good practice can be shared. I don't think there's a shortage of that.
Okay. Have you got any feeling for how it varies, based on where you are in the country? I'm guessing you're on a motorway network, you're much more likely to come across a well-serviced station, but I guess once you get further away from it, it gets more tricky. Is that unfair? I'm looking at you, I don't know why.
I think, as I say, there are many major freight corridors and arterial routes, whether it's A roads, that do not have enough parking capacity. So going back to the point around lay-bys, I mean, we're just accepting lay-by usage as the norm, and lay-bys, one of the primary functions is for emergency use, and they are just used frequently for overnight or long stays.
Could you point a place in the country where there is a gap then?
Well, I could name many. I mean, the M1, the M6 in the Midlands, the M20 going to the southeast. I mean, I'd say the vast majority of major arterial freight corridors do not have enough parking capacity. I mean, there's a number of examples that are well over capacity night after night, and drivers cannot find any space, and they're full by about 3 p.m. So it's an unacceptable situation.
Okay.
And there is, Chair, there is the last lorry parking survey highlighted the geographical areas, the hotspots, and the new survey from this year will probably replicate the same kind of information. But if we just look at where the match funding scheme, where in the country that those successful applications were, 14, the largest number, were in Lincolnshire, where the strategic road network is pretty much down to 1 or 2 roads. So the issue of local government and the road network away from the SRN is something that's really, really important. And remember that, yes, lorries are up and down motorways all the time, but they're delivering in every single square mile of the country, and they're using the roads there, and that's why we need to consider where drivers can park at the point of delivery and collection. They have a legal right now, relatively recently, to access facilities. Not that most employers will appreciate that, but it's just not enforced through local governments or through the Health and Safety Executive. And that would be one way, a very simple way in our opinion, of saying, look, if you are preventing drivers from accessing facilities when they are delivering or collecting, there is going to be a sanction, a penalty for that, even if it's name and shaming. That will give drivers more confidence to say, actually, you do have to give me access to a toilet. And for employers, for companies out there to say, actually, I don't want to be tagged with this kind of reputation. It's a very simple thing we can do, but we need better enforcement.
So just going back to the point you made to start with, so you're saying that the funding is matching where there's an investment partner rather than where there's greatest need, or were you saying the opposite there? Sorry.
I'm just trying to think off the top of my head on the last survey. I think Lincolnshire is key along the A14.
There is a need there, so there's good news.
Definitely.
Okay,
definitely.
Good.
But I don't know what those schemes are. It may be increasing security on existing parking areas. Whether it's added capacity or not, I couldn't possibly say at this moment.
I mean, to answer your question, the funding has been directed to areas that can match the investment. So,
rather than where there's greatest need. But I guess if you're a private operator, you're only going to invest in an area where you think where there is need. So you're hoping that there's some connection.
But unfortunately, there's not an incentive though for truck stop businesses to make these investments, because there is no competition in the market, because the fact is that these spaces are full regardless of the standards. So the grant scheme, breathed new life into it and unlocked investment, but there isn't an incentive to invest because of the market failure in the system.
And I think you said the grants scheme is for existing facilities, not for new facilities, which is where some of the questions were facing towards. Lawrence, did you have anything you wanted to...
Very quickly, thank you, Chair.
Sure.
One issue that's been raised through constituency casework is roadworks and limiting access to dedicated facilities, and then also blocking lay-by access. And when that happens over multiple locations, I've had constituents who are drivers who said it's had a severe impact on their welfare. It's an issue we've looked at as a committee more generally, how these works can be better coordinated. I'd just be interested if that accorded with any witnesses' experience.
I can certainly take that. So obviously there have been extensive roadworks on the motorway network over the last sort of 12 to 24 months, which has caused a huge amount of disruption. And what we have found is that there has been evidence of that lack of coordination, that one finishes just as another one starts, the next junction along. We also find that in some instances we don't get advanced notice or enough advanced notice of full motorway closures. They may only be happening overnight. But we are given probably days or a week's notice in some instances of works which must have been planned way in advance of that. I don't think that you can close a motorway.
So when you're talking about a single net, we're talking
about the motorway network. I don't think these roadwork, these planned closures just happen overnight. They are planned months and months in advance, and we don't always get enough notice of those, which puts additional pressure on the sites, because if the motorway is closed, drivers and HGVs, they might be able to get on, but they can't get off. There need to be police escorts or escorts to get them on and off. Without that proper planning between what national highways are doing and the local operators that it impacts, it does add additional pressure to a system that is already operating at the limits.
Okay, Alex.
Yes, so we do a logistics and coach operators surveys as well. That's different from the lorry driver survey, and absolutely, I think it would echo some of what's just been said. That need for information, early information, and dialogue about what's going on in terms of road diversions, road closures, and so on is absolutely crucial. And not just communicating it, but also thinking at the point that was made about the sequencing and what's the best way to do it, not just the best way to communicate it. There's, I'm sure, room for improvement there.
Okay, Alex, you wanted to ask a supplementary?
Yeah, you just said that there was no incentive in effect to invest because everything's full up already. If facilities are better, can you not charge more, and therefore the investor might make a return?
Well, I would disagree with the statement that there's no incentive to improve facilities, because we want to make things better for HGV drivers. So this isn't just about us deciding to do it because we've been given some money. This is about genuinely we want to make things better. Yes, we are busy. Yes, we are full. But we want to make things better. We want to create an environment where actually people will choose to stop at one of our locations as opposed to anywhere else. In a world where suddenly there are an additional 5,000 spaces, we want people to choose to stop a Moto. So that is our investment. We want to make things better. We're working with Mind, we're working with HGV groups, we get all the analysis from Transport Focus. So I don't agree with the statement that there's no incentive to make things better, because that is absolutely what we are doing.
Can you put the price up as well when the facilities are better?
We don't.
I think just on the cost, it is something that our members constantly talk about, the cost of parking, because who pays for it? RHA members, many RHA members will be very small operators, and increasing the cost of overnight parking is a significant obstacle. If that is then put on the drivers themselves in already a relatively low pay industry, where does that come from? That gets passed along, and so I understand the market forces of if you improve facilities, can't you put the price up? But where does that money come from?
Okay, thank you. Now to Jacob.
Thank you. So problems with parking has come out as one of the main things of this evidence today, and the lack of suitable parking spaces, meaning that drivers are having to park on slip roads or, as you said, Nikki, in the wider car parks that aren't secure. So why is it that there's a shortage of parking spaces for coaches and HGVs? Adrian, did you want to come in?
It's historical. Like many things in the industry, a lack of investment. So historically there hasn't been investment. As I mentioned earlier, around developments of new logistics areas, there hasn't been the foresight to include parking areas within those developments. We are seeing some change in that now, I'm pleased to report. But it's also, there is that not in my backyard element, and this is the planning obstacles that certainly companies like Nikki's face, that it's so time consuming and so costly that it comes back to, is there an incentive to actually develop new areas? And that's where central government and local government have to be joined in having a national infrastructure plan which includes HGV and coach parking.
So I will come to Nikki on the planning just in a sec. Maddi, did you have something to...
Yeah, so obviously planning is such a key issue. It can take a decade in some cases to get a planning application approved, but also embedding driver facilities into infrastructure projects we really see as a key part of this. The Lower Thames Crossing, for example, that does not include driver facilities included within the application. I think it did, it no longer does. That seems a missed opportunity, we would say. And just when looking at those big-scale, large-scale investment opportunities, there should be driver facilities included within those to make sure that provision is sufficient.
Anybody else, Declan?
I think we would say that we do have a broken planning system. I mean, almost every time a truck stop is proposed, the application seems to be refused. There's a very high rate of refusals. If you look at Kent as an example, there was about 18 truck stop applications which were refused in the last 15 to 20 years, and some of the grounds are quite spurious for refusal. There's an element of freight blindness in planning policy, so freight and logistics doesn't have the profile that it needs in the planning system. We've seen some recent improvements on that, but we're very far off the place that we need to be, and part of the issue is that these are essential infrastructure, and they need to be considered as such in the planning system, and they are left to local authorities as to whether or not the approval happens, and local authorities do not have they do not have the profile for the industry in their local plans or in their local transport plans, and that's one of the reasons why they are refusing these sites to be built.
And sorry, does the refusal get upheld on appeal, or do they just not bother appealing? Or what's the record on appeals?
I can talk about one specific example, actually, in Kent as well, so it's really timely. So, there have been movements in the planning policy. We have definitely seen, identification at a central level that there needs to be more facilities for HGV, and they talk about in areas of high need. The challenge is that the need is not defined in any of the documents. So, we had a recent example where we had National Highway support our application, and this was for a dedicated truck stop, actually. So it wasn't even an MSA. This would be our first dedicated truck stop that we want to build.
And this is a new facility?
New facility, brand new facility in Kent, where we want to build a dedicated truck stop. National Highway supported our application. They agreed that there was a need for it. It got refused. The local planning authority did not agree that there was a need. We appealed, we were successful on the appeal, and then it got taken to judicial review. That has just concluded, and we have been successful. But to your point, Maddi, that's taken years and years, and hundreds of thousands of pounds just to get an approval that we can proceed. So we absolutely see that there have been improvements made, but there needs to be more done. We also see the same level of challenge when we're talking just about extending existing sites. that, you know, yes, there's a need, but the local planning authority says no. On existing sites, we're also really up against the challenge of the bio-net gain challenges. It's very hard to find 10% additional bio-net gain when we need to put additional HGV spaces in. We always do, but it does mean that in some instances we can't extend to the level that we wanted to. So it is really, really challenging still for us.
And many MSAs and many parts of the SRN are going through or located in areas of outstanding natural beauty, which add to the planning complication. Sorry, does anybody know how many of these refusals were appealed and were appealed successfully? Has anyone done that work? We can find out from MHCLG.
Alex, you wanted to come in?
Yes. So I just wanted to sort of pull out. I was reflecting back on the roundtable that we had almost 12 months ago, where, like I said, we were here, other colleagues from other organisations here, and we pulled out what are the things that need to be done differently. And actually, just thinking about this conversation, some of these things need to be done together. So that one of the key points that came out was match funding and grant allocations, and obviously we need to find out where that's going in future, and I think probably evaluate the success of the grants that have already been. Has it had the impact that we thought it would? What have we learned from that? We've talked about some of that. Mapping existing provision, that's National Highways are doing a good job with that. They're doing that nationally and then regionally, but we need to think about how that is used alongside other decisions. Planning guidance, we've talked about that. That was a big theme, wasn't it, of the round table 12 months ago. We've got to put all of that together in a way that makes sense so that you are targeting the provision where the need is, you're putting in place the right enabling blocks at a national level so that locally people can get on and do it. And there's also been some, I think, one of the things that came out was maximising existing space. So, and we've talked about, again, examples of that. But how do you move that from good constructive conversations to really impactful changes?
I just had one comment to add, which was that we've done some research on the local plans and local transport plans for metropolitan councils and combined authorities.
We're coming on to planning policy,
okay.
So
yes,
I just want to pause that, and Baggy's got some questions. I just wanted to go back, so Nikki, going back to our inquiry 4 years ago, your colleagues, I think it was at Moto, said that it's not just planning that you have issues with, but to do with the leases that many MSAs are on, the lease. The difficulties with the DFT because you lease a lot, well, you as a collective group lease a lot of the MSA land, and there was issues then about renegotiating further leases in order to make investment worthwhile. Is that still an issue for MSAs?
I need to take that offline, and we'll have to come back with some written evidence. I don't have that information to hand.
No, that's useful. It was, as I say, it was 4 years ago. Okay, thank you. Baggy.
Thanks, Chair. Okay, so some site operators have trialled practices such as dynamic parking, making additional bays available overnight.
Sorry, I didn't catch that.
Additional bays available overnight that are just ordinary car parking spaces during the day. How's that helped improve the experience for drivers?
Well, I can certainly take that. So that isn't actually something that we've been able to implement at the majority of our sites. And the reason for that is safety concerns. So because all of our sites are mixed use sites, and so we've looked at all of our sites, we've got our health and safety teams to look at them. And the concern that you have is being able to securely change a coach bay, we talked about coaches, to an HGV bay. So we haven't done that because we need safe and secure facilities for coaches when they arrive because they're full of passengers. And in a number of our car parks, the movement of traffic just makes it almost impossible to guarantee safe passage for normal people in, private cars when the car park is taken over by HGVs. So we have reviewed it, but it hasn't been something that we've been able to implement.
So has anyone got any experience where it has been done, and has it worked or hasn't it worked?
Any increase to capacity is welcomed, but for all the reasons that Nick has said, we'd agree with that. But one of the other things as well, because MSAs particularly are mixed use, if a driver is having a daily rest, then you've got coaches pulling up, you've got cars pulling up left, right and centre, and again it's that quality of rest. Any increased capacity is welcome, but it has to be the right capacity in the right place.
Alex?
Yes, I mean, we've gone out and talked to a lot of the operators, and Extra have given us, maybe the example you're referring to, examples of using dynamic parking. I think, so they might be able to provide more to the committee, but I think generally, and this reflects a comment that was made earlier, the challenges are different, aren't they, in each site, and we've had other operators say that they've commissioned independent advice, specialist expert advice, to consider whether or not they could increase their capacity within their existing sites, and actually in one case said that they'd looked at them and they couldn't. So the challenges are different depending on the site.
Okay. Moving on to planning policy then, I know we've touched on it a few times. What changes could government then make to planning policy to help create more spaces?
I mean, just to continue my previous comments, a lot of the issues are, there's national planning policy which needs to change. So that's the national planning policy framework. And there needs to be a higher profile for freight and logistics within the NPPF document. There's also just not enough weight given to HGV planning policy nationally. And we, as I mentioned, we've done some research that looks at local plans and local transport plans. So of all metropolitan authorities, only a quarter have a policy for lorry and coach parking in their authority, and combined authorities only 50% have a policy for freight and logistics. So the profile for the sector in local authorities is one of the reasons why we're not seeing enough capacity. I do also want to bring the committee's attention to a government task force that was formed.
Sorry, but can we just go back to the question? What specific changes to what government could make to planning policy, rather than just update it and have a policy? What specific changes could it?
The government task force has recommended, along with industries, so the RHA, Logistics UK, and Moto and other operators, it recommended guidance that's issued to local authorities on HGV parking best practice and how that should be considered in local plan making. That hasn't been progressed to date, and the task force was initiated by the previous Transport Secretary, Mark Harper. So we would like to see that put in place. And it had consensus across the industry for that to happen, and I think that would be a very strong move to try and make improvements in this area.
Anybody else?
I just echo that point, that one of the biggest challenges is that we have is the lack of policies at local level that actually really define what their expectations are relating to HGV and freight. There's a big disconnect between the national policy and what the local planning authorities are implementing.
Are you saying national policy and the NPPF is okay, it's just the way it's interpreted locally?
I think it does come down to interpretation, but also understanding. When talking to local authorities, it's not always clear that they fully understand the importance of logistics when creating local plans. So on one hand, they do not necessarily want HGVs parking in lay-bys or parking inappropriately, but equally, when it comes to approving planning applications that would solve that issue, there is not the political will to do so. And I do think that comes down to understanding. So one thing that Logistics UK are doing is trying to raise the profile of what logistics is when talking to local authorities, so that when they are creating their local plans, they actually give the correct weight to the need for driving facilities.
Okay, so just before I bring Alex in, the NPPF, as written at the moment, it says decisions should recognise the importance of providing adequate overnight lorry parking facilities. Is that adequate, do you think?
We would say it needs to be strengthened because although the change made in 2024 was very welcome, there needs to be increased references to freight and logistics throughout the framework, so it is seen as an integral part of plan making.
Sorry, Alex.
Yeah, I mean, just super quickly, one of those specific things that I think was being referred to as DFT Circular 012022 being updated to, I think there was a consensus that needs to be updated.
And finally, from a driver's perspective, if there's an obstacle in the planning system, then let's remove the obstacle. We need to see real progress and real change, because any obstacle that prevents an increase in capacity and good quality facilities is something that drivers want to see changed. And I think that the the one thing from our perspective, and I've referenced this a couple of times already, it's not just about overnight parking, it's about HGV parking. And there is, it can be the same, it can be different, but that's where we would need to see. And there has to be, from a driver's perspective, we want to see change, we want to see increased capacity. So yes, there could be planning reform that fast tracks, applications for new capacity. Why not? Let's have a look at that. It is a crucial part of our country's infrastructure and plays a massive part in creating wealth for the economy. So, let's look at something progressive.
I mean, for those of us who sat on or chaired local planning committees, the local perspective and priorities and the national perspective and priorities are often in contradiction with each other. So would you say that there's some specificity, something specific in national and regional guidelines, such as a service area or a truck stop every X kilometres on new roadways, or I'm really shocked to hear about the fact that the truck stop's been removed from the Lower Thames crossing. So should there be a specific condition on renewals and new road facilities, or something specific as opposed to have regard to, or something like that?
The DFT circular does have details on that, but as others have said, it doesn't carry enough weight within current planning policy.
So it's about the level of weight it holds, because planning decisions are always playing off different
Exactly,
priorities.
And I think, as I say, we do think the government needs to play a much clearer role in directing local authorities on how important this is.
So obviously, if the direction nationally and regionally is of a higher level of material consideration, then it's more difficult for a local authority to refuse or to win on appeal. Did you have something you still want to come in on, Alex?
It was very largely the same point, really, in the sense that I can't see what's in it for a local authority.
Yeah, exactly.
I understand what's in it for the driver, understand what's in it for the national economy, and given that perhaps you can see what's in it for the local authority, but if you can't, perhaps it needs taking away from the local authority.
Well, I think that's intrinsically part of the problem. I mean, local authorities don't see this as a priority for them. It's the sort of NIMBYism, and I mean, we know exactly which local authorities have the highest need for lorry parking, but they aren't doing enough to actually address it in their planning policies, and it's a real issue.
Yeah.
It's, in planning terms, the stronger the higher level guidance, the more difficult it is for a local authority to get away with refusal, rather than taking the decisions away from them.
Maybe they could be incentivised.
Maddi, you wanted to come in at this point.
I think probably the most obvious is the end to inappropriate parking. All of your casework inboxes will be full of issues around inappropriate parking. If there is provision in place for appropriate parking, that would obviously end that. That's obviously an incentive to local government. What I would say, however, is that logistics is so integral to local economies, and where there is a strong logistics economy locally, then you have a strong local economy in general. And I think it's that overall lack of understanding as to what logistics can bring regionally and to local governments as well that we ourselves are working on. But until that issue is resolved, you're quite right that they don't necessarily see it as a priority.
Maddi, going back to a point that I think Adrian raised earlier about the supermarket chain that gave a different welcome until Unite intervened, I think, but gave a different welcome to their own drivers than the goods coming in. But given that logistics sites are by definition secure, is there an opportunity there for logistics sites to serve not just the drivers who are actually on that day serving that site, or even if they are, about using facilities, maybe even staying overnight?
I think in that instance it's incredibly disappointing to hear that driver had that reaction. However, there will be sites where it is not appropriate just by the general nature of logistics, where there is dangerous goods and other reasons why not, and operating licences would obviously come into it, there will be instances where sharing of facilities works, and what we've seen is that we do have members that have offered that to other members. In terms of a wider network of access, that's perhaps something that all of us on the panel could have a conversation about how we could implement something like that. But at the moment, that doesn't exist on a wide scale.
Okay, thank you very much. Baggy, I think you've got another question there.
Yes, just on the survey. So the department's already announced it's going to do another national lorry parking survey sometime later this year. What impact do you think the previous survey had, and how would you like to see the new one used?
We don't need another survey. We know the issues are very well documented. There's a very well documented set of issues. We know exactly which local authorities are facing the biggest capacity issues, and we know which routes and arterial freight corridors have no parking capacity. That's very well documented. We need action to actually address those issues on those routes, and that's what's missing at the moment from the range of government policies.
Thank you.
That was quite clear.
Yeah, I mean, that was very clear. I kind of agree with that. Although I think when the survey is done, we will find a lot of the same problems recurring. I think that must be right. Sort of putting yourself in the government's shoes, and you want to take action, you want to take a more strategic approach, you might think, I want an up-to-date survey that tells me where the gaps are now. So I think that we're sort of approaching a moment where you've got the survey, you've got the ending of the current funding, you've got potential changes to the planning where we could actually get something together where we looked at it strategically and moved forward on some of the issues you've talked about now in a way that we haven't done before.
And as one of my colleagues has said, DFT does love its surveys. Okay, thank you. Scott.
And I guess the result of the survey could be a review.
Well, don't encourage them, Scott. Don't encourage them.
A consultation.
Oh, yeah.
We need action. You're right.
Anything to avoid doing something.
Alex, I mean, you're slightly. I hear Declan's cynicism about the survey, but you sound a bit more optimistic that it might actually show something new, so you don't think it's. Declan, I think was suggesting it might be a bit of a waste of time.
I think it's how it's used, really, isn't it? If it's just used to illustrate the scale of the problem, then we're going to find it's a really big one, and not that different to 4 years ago. If it's used as part of a concerted effort to target provision in the right area, think about the planning framework, think about the funding, work with the sector to work through solutions, and it's sort of a milestone to move forward from, fantastic. But if let's not have a survey and a review and be chatting in 2 years' time, having identical conversations, redescribing the problem with sort of more animated examples.
Okay. So I want to talk about security. I think so far this morning, every time we've mentioned security, we've talked about fences. Are fences the gold standard when it comes to security for drivers? I'm being slightly flippant in saying that.
Yeah, so I mean, we do have fences. I have talked about fences. We've got 12 kilometres of fences. Oh. We have seen that the fences have deterred a lot of criminal activity. It makes it harder for the perpetrators to get in and out of the sites. Now, because we're a motorway service area, we can't have fully secure compounds because we have to be able to offer parking to all HGV drivers that arrive. So we just have fencing that you can still get in and out. Probably the bigger improvement that we've seen has been in the CCTV cameras. So we've got 500 CCTV cameras that are remotely monitored off-site that can trigger, and it's all done by AI and operatives, so when they see something that's suspicious, they will trigger the local police. Or we do also have security at sites where we think it's an issue. We do have TAPA accreditation. I can't remember, somebody else mentioned previously the importance of getting that level of accreditation. So security, I think, is critical. It's one of our key priorities to make sure that drivers feel safe when they stop at our sites, as we've already talked about. That is absolutely essential to be able to get a good night's sleep. So I don't think it is just fencing. No, it's security where you need it, dedicated on-the-ground security where you need it. It's CCTV, it's access to the police force, it's the police is responding. Now, I do have to say, actually, we have seen some really positive responses from the police. So when they do get triggered, when there are incidents, the police have responded really, really quickly. It's a combination of everything. It's not one thing in isolation.
Does that include security staff walking around?
We do have security at 15 sites, yes.
Yeah.
Okay, and you must record the registrations of vehicles going in and out the site as well?
Yes.
Yeah, okay. And so So what kind of challenge? Well, firstly, then, I guess, what security measures are the users asking for? Once you've given them fences, they've got cameras. Is there other things that they're asking for? I'm looking at you, but I don't know if others have the quick answer to that.
On our site, no. The feedback that we're getting is that actually that's what they were looking for. They were looking for CCTV, fencing, and security guards, dedicated security guards on the sites where there are particular challenges.
Well, I mean, I think I just wanted to say, freight crime is a very serious problem, and it's not being taken seriously. There's countless drivers that have their livelihoods and
who's not taking it seriously?
Well, certainly we need a better police response to it, and we do need more secure sites in place. But it is seen as more serious, more organised, and it is being perpetrated by organised criminals, who are targeting vehicles quite often when they are parked at truck stops and motorway service areas. And they know exactly where these vehicles are moving and what's inside them, and quite often they have insider knowledge. In your question about what security measures are needed, of course it's not just fencing, it's a whole range of things. There's a well-documented list of things which wouldn't surprise you, whether it's CCTV, better lighting, fencing, patrolling, and these are important security measures that really need to be put in place, but less than 4% of truck stops have a security accreditation, so there aren't enough secure sites.
I don't want to indulge in victim blaming, but are the companies doing enough to make sure their vehicles are secure and their drivers are well trained?
So the issue is not vehicle security, it's actually the security of the sites.
Yeah, but the vehicle themselves, the more secure that is, the better it is for everyone, surely.
So, I mean, with vehicles, there's standard measures on all vehicles which improve security, but the root issue is the security of the site.
So Nikki, back to your last very quick one. So if you face any barriers when it comes to upgrading the sites, do you need planning for your fences, etc.? Is there barriers? I mean, you've got funding, I guess, to help you?
Put the fencing up. We haven't come across any barriers to put the fencing up, other than there are a handful of sites where physically it's just not possible because of the layout of the land and it's up against a bank or something like that. But no, there's no...
What about barriers more generally?
For security?
Yeah.
No, not really. We don't see... There's no kind of, systemic issues or systemic barriers to providing security. As I said, we've got 47 of our sites that are accredited. I'm shocked to hear that there's only 4% of truck stops that are. We've got 47 that are accredited. So it is something that we've been really focused on.
47 out of how many then, actually?
50.
All right, so you're more than 4% of your sites.
Well, way more than 4% of our sites are accredited, yes. I haven't done the maths.
94%.
Very good, very good.
Okay.
Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Scott. Lawrence.
Thank you, Chair, and as a former researcher I feel obliged to place a enthusiastic defence of a good body of surveys on record. But, and on that point, it's a question directed to Alex. In June 2025, Transport Focus convened a roundtable of attendees across the sector to focus on this issue, and an action plan was published, I think, in November of that year. What progress has been made since then, and are you satisfied with the rate of progress?
Yes, good question. Thanks for raising that. So we're shortly going to publish an update on all the actions. We identified 7 areas of actions, I think pretty much all of which we've talked about today. And I guess we were slightly filling a gap at a national level, bringing people together and publishing something which said this is what needs to be done. You'll see it when it comes out. There's definitely movement on all the areas, but the big question is it enough? And I think it's hard to see that when we stand back from it and get people back together in the autumn, that we'll think, right, all we need to do is carry on doing more of the stuff that we've done the last 12 months. I think we'll identify that there's quite a lot more that needs to be done. There are examples of good practice. There's examples of national highways doing their mapping. There's a bit of movement on the planning framework. We need to see more detail about the assessment of the funding that's come through. A whole load of stuff, but it needs to be brought together, thought about holistically, and acted on at a strategic national level.
And in respect to those 7 recommendations, are there particular recommendations that you think you've seen particularly strong or particularly weak progress on?
So the ones I think perhaps at certainly at a national level are most important are the ones about the funding, the mapping, existing provision and planning guidance, sort of pulling those together. We have touched on all of those. I think there sort of is an interesting conversation, isn't it, about the sharing of facilities and how you might move beyond goodwill and the odd example into something much more fundamental. I think probably at this point, sitting here, we don't know how far that could go, but it's clearly, and a very kind of powerful example earlier, not good enough at the moment, but what beyond talking about it more to the right people would really catalyse that into something else. But there will be an opportunity for us to come together, stand back, look at it, and get into kind of problem solving. I think we'll have the danger is, isn't it, that we keep redescribing the problem every so often. We need to get around the table and think, what are the things now that, with DFT in the room and others, what are the things now that would really make a difference?
Thank you. Okay, over to Ollie.
Thank you, Chair. So in terms of the challenge of improving facilities at stopping locations, how are the various industry groups and site operators, including yourselves, working together to advance that? What would you say the issues are? Who'd like to go first?
I'm happy to go first.
Go for it.
So there's some brilliant organisations and companies. So I don't know if anyone's heard of My Truck Stop app, run by a lady called Sue Alty. It's basically like TripAdvisor for truck stops, free to use, where drivers can go and rate a truck stop and be able to say whether it's good, bad, and what's wonderful is she calls out the operators that are doing brilliant work as well, raising the profile of what is good. Equally, you have Motorway Buddy, which is exactly the same principle but for freight crime, so that drivers can have more commercial awareness around where is good to park, where isn't. And organisations like NAVSIS are doing huge amounts of work with ourselves, with the RHA, on issues like freight crime, trying to push for a specific crime code. So the thing is, we're all doing a lot together. What's clearly missing, I think what's coming out of this conversation is a more joined up approach across our organisations as to where we can pick up together and fill in those gaps. But there are people doing very important things, trying to improve things across the system.
Anything to add from the rest of the panel?
I would just echo what Maddi's already said. So we work with NAVSIS, we work with, actually we were rated last night on the My Truck Stop app. So we work with all of those facilities as well. We work really closely with the guys at Transport Focus as well, just in terms of understanding, directly from their members or from the surveys what the feedback is showing. So we do work really closely with those. I would echo what Maddi said. There's probably more that we could do cross-functionally just from the people on this panel.
Yeah, well, I think a lot of work has actually been done already by the industry with all of us on the panel. And I mentioned our government task force earlier that was initiated by the previous government. That had very clear recommendations which the industry signed up to, including planning reforms and certainly measures to address freight crime, as well as extension of the grant scheme. But that hasn't been progressed by the government, and there's a whole set of recommendations both on capacity and standards that we do think need to be progressed properly.
Well, that actually brings me on to my next question, and by all means come in if you wanted to say something about that, which is the last Transport Select Committee described parking capacity as quote-unquote a national issue because of its importance for the supply chain. Do you feel that the government is treating drivers' facilities as an issue of national importance? Sounds like not from your last answer, Mr. Pang.
I don't believe it is being treated with the level of importance that it needs. It's not seen as national infrastructure, which it needs to be. We haven't seen enough political focus on it from ministers, despite raising it repeatedly. And we would like to see much greater political priority placed on this, because that's the only way we will get some of the changes that we need brought about.
I think I'd agree with that broadly, but there is also a certain element of we all know what the problem is. It's someone else's job to sort it out, and I think from the evidence that's been given today, there are good things that are being done, but it's far too little and far too slow. From a driver's perspective, yes, there is more that the sector can do, the logistics, the road haulage sector can do. However, we would want to see a much broader discussion with that. So cross-sector involvement, retailers, manufacturers, ports, construction, so we can talk about what the issues are, because we're talking amongst ourselves here rather than talking almost about what the issues are more broadly. So there is good work being done, but we need to have a much broader, much wider discussion so we can talk about the small wins that we can achieve while still working for the big changes that we've all been so clear on today.
Okay, thank you. Are you okay? I think the question is government taking sufficient ownership of the issue, and you're basically all saying no. Which I've got a question at the end that will pick that up as well. But Lawrence, you've got a question on standards.
Yes, thank you, Chair. I think long-term observers of the industry might feel a certain sense of déjà vu because the predecessor Transport Committee published a report in 2022 which covered much of the ground which we've been talking about today. One of the recommendations of that report was that the government should set out a statutory code of conduct containing minimum standards covering security, availability of amenities, food and provision for separate women's drivers' facilities. It's a question to anyone who wants to come in. Do you think that there is, or did you agree with that recommendation? Do you agree with it now? Or do you think that's something that this committee should be taking forward?
I can take that from Moto's perspective. So we'd welcome, the more clarity around what those standards are and what those minimum standards would be. The one sort of caveat that we need to just be constantly aware of within the MSA sector, which we've already talked about, is that we do service a number of mixed user groups. So any minimum standards that are would apply to a dedicated truck stop may not be able to be implemented in full in an MSA which has mixed use for coach drivers, families, passengers, commuters. So we just need to be really cautious that there's nothing that would restrict our ability to service the need of all of our user groups.
And I would say, well, Unite absolutely supports this, and it's something that we've been campaigning on for a very long time. But it's worth remembering that minimum standards are minimum standards, not gold standard. And from a driver's perspective, that is somewhere to park with decent, surface that I don't need to dodge potholes and things on. And Nick has already said that Moto have invested in that kind of thing. Access to toilets, a certain level of security. So the minimum standard expectations from a driver's perspective are really quite minimum. They are not of that gold standard. Yes, we'd love somewhere to exercise, we'd love a gym, we'd love a spa, we'd love everything else, of course we would. But there also has to be recognition, and I agree, that for different facilities there would need to be different minimum standards. The key for us is it's all right having minimum standards, and we can use a TripAdvisor type app and rate that. But ultimately, what's the purpose of having minimum standards? How do we measure them? How do we reward going above and beyond minimum standards? And clearly that should be access to further funding for further investment. If you meet a certain standard, you could then access further funding to further improve your facilities. So, and drivers are very passionate about the industry. It's one of the things that I love about working in the sector, is the passion for the job, the passion for the sector. And to be treated in a way that they are, not to have nationally recognised minimum standards, is an insult to the profession, in our opinion. So we would very strongly support developing minimum standards, but also how do we inspect, enforce and reward?
I mean, we also support minimum standards, particularly minimum security standards, because there is a lack of competition in the market. You can't reliably obtain permission for these sites, so there's not enough competition to ensure that these standards are what is required. And as Adrian said, these are very basic things that we all take for granted in our jobs, and it's the basic dignity that drivers deserve that needs to be put in place.
So if I've understood correctly, are you saying that if minimum standards were in place, it would actually help with some of the planning issues and refusals? Or?
I don't think it would help with planning, but okay. I think it would help improve current sites.
Okay. Yeah. Thank you.
So just to say, at the roundtable we had a year ago, we had minimum standards came up. It didn't quite make it onto the list of things that we should happen in the next 12 months, actually because some of the issues we've talked about in terms of who would enforce them, who would set them, what would they cover. And I think it is symptomatic, isn't it, of the challenge we've got generally. That's a bit of national infrastructure which isn't owned at a national level by any single organisation. So I think were you to start going down the route of standards, you've probably got some prior questions about who's responsible for monitoring them, being at a kind of, and taking that strategic view of rest stops as a whole, and then therefore in a position to set and monitor the standards.
My only addition would be that any standard needs to be developed alongside with industry to make sure that drivers have their voice within any development of the standard.
Okay, final question from me. So 4 years ago, drivers told us that conditions were a lot better for drivers in other European countries. I assume that's still the case. I'm particularly concerned to pick up this issue about the role of government. Do we think that the role of government is that government is more involved in those countries where the situation is better? Now, obviously, I've referred to many other people's experience of driving on the French motorways. I can't speak for the equivalent to the SRN in France, but you can quite clearly see there is a national standard for airs every 10 kilometres and full service staffed MSAs, I think, every 50. Do any of the witnesses have any understanding of the role of government in providing adequate facilities for drivers in their countries?
Well, I would say that France, Spain, Italy, for example, run services under government concession contracts. So, there are many examples on the continent where other countries are doing this much better. Mm-hmm. Frequently drivers will tell us that the UK has the worst facilities in Europe.
In the whole of Europe?
That's a frequent comment that I receive.
Wow.
And, it's very acute if you make the comparison with our European neighbours.
Anything from logistics?
Only just that we hear that one of the biggest differences is that drivers on the continent feel more respected than drivers here. And I don't know whether that's a cultural view of the profession of driving or where that comes from, but that is certainly what our members tell us.
Okay, any colleagues got any further questions they want to pick up? Yes, Alex.
Do lorry drivers pre-book their spaces ever, or is it all like turn up and pay and display?
So certainly at the MSA network, for Moto, they don't book because we have to open full access, so we have to be able to offer spaces. So no, we don't offer booking.
Okay.
There are facilities that do offer pre-booking, but again, it's not standard.
Okay. Well, we're all going to load up my truck stop on our phones and have a look and see where the lay-by that we saw 4 years ago, where that fits on the scale, if it even features at all. Okay, thank you very much to our witnesses. That does conclude today's session, but do feel free to write to us with anything you feel you haven't been able to cover in your answers this morning, and that concludes today's meeting.